Welcome, everyone, returnees and those, if this is your first time seeing the new auditorium, that's great. We'd love to have you and welcome in. My name is Dan Turner. I'm in charge of programming and outreach for the library system. So you may have, I've seen some of you up at Waccamaw and elsewhere, but it's good to see you down here too, especially with these new digs. So we're open back up, the library here. You check out the other part of it as well. It looks great, all shiny and bright again. But this is sort of a celebration of the opening of the library, this series we're doing, but it's also the 225th anniversary of library services in Georgetown County. So all the way, way back to 1799, that is a year older than the Library of Congress. So this is a big history here. So this series is all about celebrating that 225 years, and hopefully we'll keep going for another 225. But we're thrilled to have y'all here, and we want to say thank you, as always, to South Carolina Humanities, which sponsors this series and does a lot else for this library. So we're grateful to South Carolina Humanities again for making this series possible, and enabling us to get great speakers like today. We got John Lane. He's a friend of the library. He's done a couple of talks up at Waccamaw. This is his first adventure down here in Georgetown. So thrilled to have him. Yes. And John is just an absolute treasure. He was actually born across the line in the northerly Carolina, but he quickly, that's right, John? But he quickly moved down across the line to the better South Carolina here. So we definitely claim him as one of ours. He's published over 20 books now, and we will sell you those books afterwards. We'd be happy to sign them and sell them, personalize them to you, but he's just not all 20, he just brought a selection of them, because John is one of the most prolific and preeminent voices for the Southern ecology, and a lot of it's focused right here in South Carolina. He's been all over the backwoods, the gullies, the rivers, the creeks, the mountains, and coastline here in South Carolina. So he really celebrates our natural resources, and he really is one of our natural resources here, John, in and of himself. He's truly a treasure. So it's an honor to have him here again, and we're thrilled to do this. He taught creative writing for years at Wofford up in Spartanburg, and he was the founding director of the Goodwill Center there for Environmental Studies. And he's, as I say, a treasure of South Carolina. He helped found Hub City Writers Project, which is taking on national implications up there from Spartanburg, a bookshop, but a press as well. Doing great work, but he and his wife Betsy Teeter were co-founders of that, and he has been inducted into the South Carolina Academy of Authors, sort of the Writers Hall of Fame for South Carolina. So he's right up there with Pat Conroy and all the rest. So we're thrilled to have John Lane here, and he's going to talk about something near and dear to his heart: alligators. So something that, it's a signal creature down here in the low country, and he spent a lot of time looking at gators and their terrain with Phil Wilkinson is here as well. They wrote this wonderful book, 7 Days on the Santee Delta. John, a lot of his words, some of Phil's words, but beautiful pictures from Phil as well. So, and Phil's nickname is the Gator Man. So he spent 6 decades working for SEDNR out working with gators. So we're great to have Phil here, another South Carolina treasure, and Libby Bernadine, a wonderful poet in her own right. And those are her poetry books. You're welcome to take one with you as you go and enjoy some local and area poets. All right, I'll shut up now and turn this thing over to the new Gator man, John Lane.
Thank you, Dan. Dan is another treasure. Dan's a great poet and a great reader of literature. Not everybody's a great reader, but Dan is a great reader, and I always appreciate any time I get to spend time with him and talk to him about fiction and poetry and Southern culture. And I really appreciate you asking me down here. When he asked me to do this, about a year ago, I thought, what do I want to talk about? And there's a million things I could talk about because I'm a boy. I'm a Piedmont boy. I'm not a coastal plains person. I grew up, as Dan said, I was born in North Carolina, but my family is 10 generations in the Spartanburg County area. And so when my father died when I was 5 in North Carolina, my mother packed us up and brought us back to the hometown, Spartanburg. So I grew up there, and I feel like that's my real center of my life is the Piedmont. But I've always had this theme in my work, and the themes has been animals and wildlife. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know wildlife in the way Phil knows wildlife. I don't have books at home full of actual data where I could actually know something about animals by reading all this data that I've got. But what I've got from 40 years of traveling around with people like Phil is stories. And that's what I discovered early on, because I was terrible at math and not that great at biology, that what I could contribute was I could go with these friends and I could bring the stories back. And that's what I've done for 40 years. And some of them, a few of them, have worked into my books, either as poems or as essays or little stories. And so when I started thinking about this talk, I started thinking, well, Dan's asked me to do this, and I'm gonna have a captive audience. And so what I wanna do is I wanna talk about 30 minutes about the alligator people and the alligators that I've been lucky enough, privileged enough to be in connection with. And a lot of people think that's really crazy because alligators are not something you want to be in connection with mostly, but my friends and me throughout my whole life, we've gone out looking for alligators. And I've gotten some good stories from it. I'm going to try to tell you some stories and read you a few things from 3 people. When I was in college, high school and college, I had a friend, I still have a friend, he's still alive, named David Scott. And when we got to college, David Scott was a biology major and very interested in reptiles and amphibians. And I was an English major, but David was my best friend. And so David would say something like, okay, John, Friday afternoon, when I get out of lab, we're gonna go up on Highway 11 and we're gonna get a 6-pack of beer. That was back in the days when you could do that. This was the 70s. And we're gonna ride Highway 11 back and forth for an hour and a half right at sundown and look for any snake that's crossing the road. And then we'll catch them and we'll put them in a pillowcase, and then we'll take them back to Wofford and we'll photograph them. And he was doing this for David because he wanted to have this big collection of photographs of snakes of South Carolina. And so we would do that, and out of that grew a great friendship and also a lot of great stories and a lot of great trips. And my junior year at Wofford College, David and I went, it's the 2 of us, we had this weird thing at Wofford called the interim, and it was a great thing. The month of January, you took 1 course, and you could make up the course yourself if you could come up with something good. And so we did 3 of them together, David and I, And one of them we did was called The Flora and Fauna of the Everglades. And all we had to do was go to Florida, spend a month in the Everglades, catch as many animals as we could, take as photos of as many animals, and then write a paper, and then that was our course. We'd get 4 hours credit. And we loved, as I said, riding the roads looking for snakes, so this was great. We made this course up and we did it. And I'm going to start off by reading you just a little passage about that. Let me see, I got to get my other bag. I thought I had it out. Sorry about that. So we went to the Everglades my junior year, 1976, and this is what we did. And this is just a few paragraphs. We had a professor named Ab Abercrombie, and he's the second person I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes more about. And he was a sociology professor, but he was very good with mathematics and statistics, and so he got interested in wildlife, and he became a wildlife modeler. And then he ended up getting, his first PhD was from Yale in sociology, but when he was about 35 years old, he decided, well, I'll just go back and get a second PhD in wildlife biology. So he went back to University in Texas and got a second PhD. And so he's mentioned in this first paragraph. This is the Everglades, 1976. Along the edges of the Everglades National Park, cattle acreage and vegetable farms push up against wildness. Sanctuary, the biologist Archie Carr called the park in his book, The Everglades. The Everglades are unique, he says. They have no counterpoint anywhere on Earth. During my junior year in college, I spent part of a December and January in the Everglades on an independent interim about wildlife with my close friend David Scott. Cattle were far from our minds that December when we made our way south from South Carolina. Professor Ab Abercrombie had agreed to be our sponsor for the class, and he told us what he knew of the Everglades and let us borrow his old Grumman canoe and sent us on our way. It's in the Everglades where I saw many endangered species the first time: the bald eagle, the reddish egret, the indigo snake, the Everglades kite. The Everglades National Park is big, over 1 million acres, but most of the visitors stay on a few miles of paved roads and trails, camp in numbered spots and campgrounds, and sleep in their Winnebagos. For us, our first month in the Everglades was an outlaw trip. I'm not proud of this now, but this is just what we did. We felt that the regulations of the Park Service had established had little to do with us, and they were for the tourists who visited the Everglades, not for young explorers. All right, I'm going to stop here and tell you a quick story about David. So the first thing we do, we would stay out really late at this bar in Spartanburg. We did this 4 times. We went to the Everglades 4 times. This was the first time, though. And then we'd stay up till 1 o'clock, and then we'd leave for Florida in David's Pinto station wagon at 1 a.m. And we'd drive all the way to the Everglades without stopping. And we'd get there, no sleep, and there was this one trail at the top edge of the park, and they had a tram that went down it 6 miles, and then there was a big tower where you could look out over the Everglades, and then the tram would carry you 6 miles back. But we would walk it. So we'd get there dead tired, and we'd get out and we'd start, because we had this contest going that first year. We were very competitive with each other. And we had a contest where the person at the end of the month who had caught the most animals would get this really ugly, dirty Izod shirt that we had found on the side of the interstate. And so we headed down there and stopped a couple of times, and David had chased an armadillo, or I'd chased an armadillo, and like we were tied like 1-1 with an animal when we got to the Everglades. But there was anytime you make a road in Florida, there's always a drainage ditch next to it, at least in South Florida, because they take the dirt from the drainage ditch and build the road with it. They probably do that down here too, but build the road with it. And so there's a drainage ditch for 6 miles along this road we were walking. A 12-mile walk, 6 down, 6 back. So we're walking, and we got this contest, and And David wants to win. He wants to win everything. And he's more athletic than I am, and he's fearless. And so the first thing David does when we're about a mile and a half and it's got water, the ditch has got water in it, is he sees some baby alligators in the water. And he dives head first into the ditch and grabs these baby alligators, and he comes up and he's got them between his fingers like this. He's got 5 of them, and then he starts looking around because he knows if they're baby alligators, there's a mama somewhere. But he gets out quickly and he says, 7 points, 7 points. I've got you. You're never gonna catch up with me. So we spend the rest of the time at the Everglades. He ended up beating me pretty badly, but
Did he have any fingers left?
he had fingers left. I saw David one time. This was amazing. I saw David one time catch on the run a raccoon by the tail. And, like this, to keep it from, and let it go, right away. But he was just so incredibly good at that sort of stuff. So let me go back to this piece and read a few more, get into it a little bit more before I move on from David. Oh, I need to show you. It's not a PowerPoint, obviously, because I haven't even mentioned it. I was in a lab somewhere and just took this picture once. I thought that was a pretty remarkable alligator, Scott. I can't even remember where I took it. But I have a picture of David down here. Here's a picture he sent me last week that he took. He said, everybody might want to see the difference between the head of an alligator, an American crocodile, and a caiman. So you can see the difference there. The alligator's at the top. It's got the round snout. Phil, you correct me if I'm wrong. The American crocodile is at the bottom on the left, and the caiman is on the right with more of a narrow snout. But anyway, David has 1 million photographs of alligators and crocodiles. There's a couple in here I'm going to show you. Okay, here's David. I found this slide last week. That trip to the Everglades, I took this slide of him. That's one of the trails down there. And David was a great photographer, and I'd forgotten I even had this. It was a Kodachrome slide. I had to take it to the Photoshop and get it digitized. But there's David. All right, let me go back to my reading here. Okay, we camped where we wanted. Remember, we're outlaws. We camped where we wanted, caught an 8-foot endangered indigo snake with our bare hands. I've got another slide, and we'd catch everything and then release it right away. It wasn't like we were smuggling them out of the Everglades or anything. But the crazy thing that my mother could never believe when I'd come back and tell her is that we kept these snakes when we catch them in the tent in pillowcases with us when we were camping. And so I've got an amazing picture of the tent with about 4 non-poisonous snakes crawling around in it. We photographed them and released them unharmed the next day where we'd caught them. We spent our days hip deep in water and mud off the trail, visited off-limit islands in the Grumman canoe. Though Ab had not encouraged our lawlessness, he wasn't even aware of it at the time. He was like the threshold guardian for the fairy tales, pointing the way down the trails. He had told us to go and find wildlife in the Everglades, and that's what we did. David stayed my friend all the way through college, and in graduate school. I went to graduate school in English at the University of Virginia, and then he went to graduate school in ecology at the University of Virginia, but we were roommates and we stayed together, so I did a lot of stuff. And we kept up with Ab Abercrombie, this incredible professor we had at Wofford. And he was getting very interested in a type of crocodilian in Central America, in Central America, in a country called Belize. And at that time, this would have been the late 70s, he received a grant to go down and do a survey of the entire country to see what the status was of this particular crocodile called the Moralitz crocodile. I've got a picture of him here. That's one of David's pictures of the Moralitz crocodile. They're fairly big animals. They can be. They're at that time in 1980, they were being hunted pretty seriously, and nobody was really completely sure what their status was, whether they were doing well or whether or not. So what Ab did was got a grant, and he took David as sort of a wildlife assistant, because David was already in graduate school, and he asked me to go along, and what he asked me to do is go with his partner at the time, or still his partner, his wife now, was a sociologist, but was very interested in questionnaires and statistics. So she created a questionnaire, and Chrissy and I, Belize is a small country. It's probably about the size of Georgetown County, maybe not even that big. But Ab asked the two of us to spend 4 weeks visiting every single village in Belize, going to the village, tracking down the crocodile hunters, and then asking them this series of questions. And so for the 4 weeks that they were in the bush looking for crocodiles, I was with Chris going from village to village, tracking all these people down. And one of the stories that came out of their side of it, Ab and David's side, that I wish I would have been there for, was, they told me later, was that they had been up the river, a river called the McCall River, looking for crocodiles in a canoe again. And they were in these pools in between these waterfalls, and they actually caught a large Moralitz crocodile. Could have been this one right here, actually. They caught it, and they caught it at night, so they wanted to work it up, they call it, the next morning, measure it and figure out all that stuff about it. And so they took it back in the canoe to the campsite. Put it in the canoe in the camp and took it back into the campsite.
They were in a canoe too.
They were in the canoe too. Now the crocodile was tied up, secured with duct tape, legs around his back, duct tape around his snout, in the crocodile. And this was a big crocodile. And so they got there and they said, well, we're gonna work it up and photograph it in the morning, so let's just put it in the Land Cruiser overnight. And in the morning, we'll just take it out and put it on the ground and do all the things we need to do to it. So they're camped in tents around the Land Cruiser, and they borrowed a Land Cruiser from a guy there in the country to tool around in. We did that. I was down there twice with them. We did that both times. But in the middle of the night, suddenly they hear honk, honk, honk. And David says they all woke up, and David said to his tent mate, oh my God, the crocodile's stealing the Land Cruiser. And they get out, and what's happened is the crocodile has worked its way loose from everything. And it's entirely loose in this Land Cruiser, and it's hooked its tail up through the steering wheel of the Land Cruiser, and every time it would shift, it would honk the horn. And so it took them about an hour to catch the crocodile again and get it out of the Jeep and get it on the ground and do everything they needed to do to it. But they did it, and they got it, and they took some pictures, and I would not be surprised if this was not the offending animal right here. I'm not sure. So I'm off interviewing crocodile hunters, and I'm going to read you a journal entry that shows you what I was interested in. This is one that did not make it into the final report that went to the crocodile, whatever, wherever the thing was published. This is just what I had in my journal. I've got these journals that go back to the 1970s, and it's really fun to go through. I'll show you a page from one of those journals, and I'm going to read you what I here's a picture of Ab, and there I am. I'm the guy on the left. That is 1978. I think that's the Everglades. And that is a typical Ab Abercrombie outfit, probably still today. He loves camo, and he wears it well. And my hair is not quite as thick anymore, but I'm still just as happy. I'm still just as happy. All right, here we go. All right, here's a journal entry of mine from Belize from 1980. I've got little pictures and of a crocodile there, and I'm writing down, you know, what the crocodile hunters are telling me and everything. Well, what I didn't realize, or what I should have realized, was that they're not always going to tell you the truth. It was a lot better when you had just Chrissy's like form, like, how many times have you, and I'm writing the stories down, you know, anything they tell me, I'm writing it down. And so this is one of the stories that one of the crocodiles told us. Okay, 27 May 1979, Belize. We got into Dangriga town about 8 p.m. and walked down the road to a motel we had seen on the way in. The next morning, a young man on a bicycle said his uncle knew much about alligators. They call crocodiles alligators in Belize. He said his uncle, quote, hunted them with a stick, unquote. He took us to see that uncle. We walked about a block, and he took us in the bottom of a 2-story wooden house trimmed in blue. Seemed to be a meeting place of some kind. There was no visible icebox or refrigerator to sell Cokes or beer out of, but everyone seemed to be casually gathered there. Now in Belize, if you got a house, you've generally got a little refrigerator that you'll sell beers and Cokes out of. So that's what I was referencing there. When we were introduced to his uncle, the man got very serious and said, "Come upstairs." We were taken into one of 3 rooms. There was very little furniture, and it just didn't look like someplace you would live. We all sat down, and the uncle sat down with us, and the rest of the people just stood around smoking pot. You know, this is, yeah. The uncle answered our questions once we got him started, but I had a strange feeling we were being set up, that they were putting us on. I should have known for sure they were after I read you what. He said he had observed alligators many times, and there was no doubt about that listening to him talk, but he kept insisting that he did not hunt them with a gun, but instead he went into a scattered explanation about how he actually did hunt them. He hunted other animals with a gun, but with alligators, he said he subdued them by putting a reed up their nose after he waded out into the water. The whole interview was filled with this kind of magic and conjuring. He said the way he got them out of the caves was he had to go underwater and bite their tails. He told me all their systems, everything in them is tied to the tip of their tail, he said. And if you bite the tip of the tail, that'll bring them out. After we talked to this uncle, we went over to another house in hopes of interviewing yet another alligator hunter, a friend of the uncle's. While we waited, one of the guys went into the yard and picked some grass for me to make a tea because he knew I'd been sick the day before. I'd gotten off the bus in the capital of Belize City. Belmopan. There's a new capital in the middle of the country, and the buses all go through there. And I'd gotten out and I'd walked into the square and I'd thrown up. Just suddenly. I didn't even know I was sick. It's just like, bleh! And projectile vomiting, I think they call it. And I from that point on, I was sick. And this guy heard, I told him I was sick, and so he goes out in the yard and he picks a bunch of grass he calls fever grass, and he says, "Make a tea out of this and you'll feel better." So my journal is full of stories like this. I did, yeah, it worked. So I never figured out, though, how to use that material, all that material that I got in Belize those 2 summers I was down there. But I did get a couple of poems out of it. And I'm going to read you one of those, a poem that I wrote about David, my friend David. And let's see, I've got it written down here. It's a little easier to read. It's a little bigger. It was in this book of mine, selected poems called Abandoned Quarry, that I don't have any copies with, unfortunately, back here. But That came out about 8 years ago. But this is the poem I wrote when I got back from Belize that summer about David catching crocodiles. It's called Reptiles Teach Him About Hunting, Notes on Catching Crocodiles in Belize. And David Scott is the character in it. After years dragging through streams in South Carolina, I find my friend here, David, prone across the bow of a canoe, his headlamp the only light. Oh, let me show you this. This is a picture David sent me. Yeah, that's a picture David took of alligators. I shine with alligators at night. So his headlamp, the only light, breath falling, rising with each paddle beat from the stern. I'm in the stern paddling. David's out on the bow with that headlamp looking at this. And he's kind of guiding me, go here, go there. He fixes the croc's red eyes and his lamp whispers, "It's still up," meaning still up above the water. The brain takes the crocodile's brain takes over, crawling out through the marsh to play an old game. Ahead, the croc floats, secure in the one sure eye of the lamp. Or it's late on a dry season night like this one, with no moon, and you are a croc hunting for pond turtles. Then another hunter hauls his canoe from its hiding spot a half-mile inland and slaps you with the light. You spark red and stay up until the light in you blinks out as buckshot cracks the tight bone of your skull. He strips your belly skin, sells it to a local hide dealer for enough Belizean dollars to feed his family a week. The canoe stops. David moves quickly, grabs snout. It twists loose, larger than he thought, pulls him in, then it's gone. "Crap," David snorts. "Crap, I had a big one." David stands, old fatigues dripping, rising from another age, the light focused on a finger where a croc tooth pulled blood. Then he throws the arm of light over the marsh again, looking for shines, the old game, how it goes on. Thank you. So I went through, after that period in Belize, I went through a period of a few years, and then I got a call from Ab saying he had another project that he wanted me to help him on. We were going to go to, he was being hired to survey a massive ranch in South Florida for alligators. The guy who owned the ranch had been a cattle rancher, and the cattle prices had fallen through the floor, and he kept thinking, well, maybe I should just ranch alligators, because he knew he had a lot of alligators on the ranch. And so he wanted to get somebody that knew what they were doing down to drive all over the ranch and see how many alligators were on the ranch. And Ab thought this was a crazy idea, but he was willing to do it because this guy was going to pay him. And so he invited me to come down as well. And we went down there and we spent a week, went to every part of this ranch, including a 9,000-acre cypress swamp that was in the middle of the ranch. I thought I was going to write a book about this 1 week with Ab on this ranch. So I was taking notes like crazy, and I actually did get a couple of essays out of it. And I wanted to read you a little bit of one of those. Let's see. Yeah, there's a few paragraphs here. Now this is, like I say, I spent a week there, and this is, I haven't had a lot of people say, well, weren't you afraid when you did all this? And I never was, because I just love being with these guys, and the adventure of it was so much. I never had a moment where I thought an alligator was going to eat me, except this one moment that I'm going to read you. And then it was me reacting to the alligator, not the alligator reacting to me. But this was the one time that I really was a little afraid. when I was out with Ab and everybody. We go to this one place, and there are this one area, and there are these paths all through the swamp that's fairly dry. And Ab says we need to go down all the paths and see if we see any alligator holes, any places where there are alligators, and that come back, and he'll go this way and I'll go that way, and when we get back we'll compare notes. And so I go off trying to figure what. Okay, duckweed is this beautiful. If anybody know what duckweed is, that green weed that's on the top of a lot of water in the low country. Duckweed smells wet, reptilian. It's the way the Devonian must have smelled. Most times the open water in a pond or swamp in South Florida is thick with it. If you look directly down at the water that has drained out of a cypress swamp, it looks black under the green scum of duckweed. The small leaves, when looked at up close, are more like lace than scum. They are quite beautiful, really. They make you want to look down again and see what else you've missed. The clear water with the beautiful duckweed on it makes me wonder what other mistakes I've made, what else I've overlooked. I broke into one of the alligator interstates. That's what Ab called these paths, alligator interstates. I broke into one of the alligator interstates that we had seen from the plane. We had a plane there, and we were doing an aerial survey of the ranch first to see where we could go, and this was the day after, and we'd seen this place with all these paths going through it. So we go there. It was a trail beaten through the grass by alligators, the 8 or 10 inches of pond water exposed in long slices through the grass. The interstate headed off toward the Oak Island, and I had the feeling that we'd see some alligators there. I slowly crossed the alligator path, continuing out toward the center of the pond. The water didn't get any deeper, and I had not seen any alligators yet. If they were in the sawgrass, if they were in the grass, they were sunning in the matted grass where I couldn't see them. There were more alligator interstates, there were a dozen trails, all leading toward the Oak Island. I discovered one spot that looked like an alligator cloverleaf, a place where many of the trails came together, and I decided I'd take the largest trail toward the Oak Island. I'd even seen the thick bulb piles of alligator scat in the matted grass where the trails came together. I looked east in the distance, and I could barely see Ab near a willow stand. He was still walking the margin of the pond, following a regular grid through the grass. I felt guilty for a moment, sauntering as I was, my eye not on the prize of the Oak Island, the established goal of our survey. So I turned toward the high ground. I began to be systematic, to try to cut the field into quadrants and return to the survey. The island goal was only 50 yards from me when I heard a rustling in the grass on a parallel path beside me, so I ran to cut off what I thought was a small gator. I stepped in the path. It was bearing down on me full speed, a 10-foot alligator, high walking up on its 4 feet. Oh no, I thought, it's headed right at me. Then I stepped off the interstate, and the alligator passed me by, close enough to touch, and disappeared into the Oak Island. Now my heart was covered with duckweed. I walked slowly toward the island, looking from side to side. When I reached it, which sits high and dry above the pond, I saw where the gator was heading. There were 3 small ponds ringed with alligator caves at the center of the island. The big gator was merely beating a retreat past me from his sunbathing spot in the grass. He'd heard me coming, and I just happened to step in the way. Had he hit me, it would have been more like stepping in front of a bus covered with duckweed, and a bus with big teeth. So after that, that was 1988. It was years. Ab had lots of stuff he was doing. I was back at Wofford, and I was teaching English. And I didn't go out in the field a lot. And then my friend Libby Bernadine and my friend Phil Wilkinson found out I was working on a book about coyotes. And Phil told me that I should come down and do a chapter about coyotes out on Yawkey. And so I came down, and I spent some great trips down here with Phil and visiting with Libby. And I wrote a chapter in this book, Coyote Settles the South, about coyotes down here on the coast, and got to spend some great time with Phil. And several of Phil's friends had started telling me, Phil's got the best stories in the universe. So you need to go and spend time with Phil. And so I started coming down here, and I guess I made 10 or 12 trips to Georgetown, and I would go out with Phil onto the Yawkey Preserve and all around, because Phil grew up here, and just started writing Phil's stories down. And we got a book out of it. Phil also is a tremendous photographer. This is one of his cover pieces. This book has about 100 of his photos in it. It's also got writing from Phil, and it's got a 7-piece narrative that I wrote of my trips down here and following Phil around, and just writing down his stories. And I'm gonna end with and open it up for questions. Let me check the time here. Yeah, I'm going to open it up for questions in a minute. I'm going to end with a short piece out of here, and then I'm going to end with a poem by Phil about an alligator, because I think he's got some of the greatest alligator poetry there is. But the day that I'm going to read from quickly, just a little piece, is the third day. And we were actually not on Yawkey, we were in the Santee Coastal Preserve, up the coast a little bit. And we came across a site that I'll never forget. A water hole was full of feasting wading birds, but also full of alligators. And we came across that, and Phil got some great photos, and some of them are in here. But this is describing what we saw from the truck that day. Soon we encountered an unexpected wildlife bonus, a strange payoff for the perfunctory opening of trunks and draining of the ponds for annual Phragmites spraying. It's a scene of complete frenzy in a field ditch worthy of the christening of the Santee Delta in Garden and Gun magazine as, quote, the Serengeti of the South, unquote. Phil sees what is ahead and quickly stops before he spooks the foraging birds. They're living off the land, he said, then jumps out with his camera and creeps forward along the canal. Ahead of me is a shallow pond with a dark, scummy surface, and within it, everything is eating everything else. A feast. The diminishing pond holds at least 100 wading birds stilting about in the shallow water, picking at trapped fish. Among the feeding birds cruise a number of alligators as well. As Phil frames the photos from the ground, I climb into the truck bed with binoculars for a better view of the feeding frenzy. I glass the pond, swinging from one irregular mud bank across to the next, mostly drawn to the waiting clusters of great egrets and meandering wood storks and a few little blue herons up on purple-black banks. 2 wood storks spar, wings up, and look like dinosaurs. Others forage around them, their obscene featherless heads, their flint heads, as Phil describes them, and their scissor beaks bobbing in the mud. They feed by feel, bumping up against their prey as they probe small fish, frogs, insects, and occasionally small alligators. The great egrets are more delicate, less desperate as they feed. Their stark white feathers unaffected by the mud they subsist within. The flats are spotted with the chalky droppings of all these big birds. 8 alligators glide through the thin ribbons of shallow water, slowly zigzagging like snorkeling submarines between the gorging wood storks and the great egrets. The gators are stained a drab, muddy tan with a purplish hue from their foraging among the low waters of the ditch. Most of the reptiles are smaller, 4 or 5 feet, but there is one distinct larger one. A clay hand grenade with a 6-inch antenna is affixed behind the gator's bulging, bony eyes. It's wearing one of the scientists' radio transmitters. The gator is part of a study where the scientist eavesdrops on it by satellite from above. She knows where it was captured and released and which route it took to get to this all-you-can-eat buffet. Phil returns after the quick photo safari. He's excited, but not surprised we've stumbled upon one of the research gators. Abby found out pretty quick that in a single week, an alligator covers a lot of land, he says, adding he has taken some decent shots of it. The novelist E.M. Forster believed that much of romance in life comes by way of chance confrontations, chance collisions, and here is a prime example of that literary law at work. We wander out for a day in the field and come across this wired, foraging alligator working overtime for conservation. So this book, we don't have any of these here, but it's downtown. Where is it?
I believe Waterfront.
Yeah, Waterfront has it, and it just went. We sold out the first printing. It's by Evening Post Books in Charleston, but they've reprinted it, so it's available again. So be sure to pick this up, and then track Phil down and get him to sign it. I'm going to end with what I think is one of the best alligator poems of all time, and it's not by me; it's by Phil Wilkinson. Phil has worked with the alligators that he's worked with. I'm gonna have to look for it in here. I thought it was in my notes, but it's not. The alligators that he's worked with, he's worked with the same alligators for sometimes as much as 40 years because they're protected out there. And so he studied these same alligators for all that time, and he got to know them in ways that other people don't get to know animals, any kind of animal. People, I guess, have worked with grizzly bears and wolves, but it's hard to even imagine a grizzly bear. Let me change this rule. Living that long, but an alligator does. Here's my favorite Phil Wilkinson picture. There we are. All right, I'm going to have to find this poem, and it's going to take me just a second. All right, here we go. This is called The Dance. One of my favorite poems. The Dance by Phil Wilkinson. In the black fly time during the dog days of summer, where the dewy grass on the levee meets the still black water, and day soon crawls over marsh mist on the hot, heavy morning, we come together again, the we being Phil and an alligator, to do a dance we've done before. Unblinking, we hold each other's gaze one breath away. Your golden Saturn eyes, each pupil crossed with a dark, narrow line. I wonder how they see me. I wonder what they know. Gently, the snare is worked behind the massive jaws. You don't seem to mind. Our eyes are locked. We both know we've done this dance before. Then the usual struggle, but nothing more. We've both grown old, living side by side. When I need you to tell me things I want to learn, I always know where to find you. Nearly half our lifetime, we have done this same dance. And along the way, we've come to know either of us could do the other harm. Perhaps the time has come for this to end. For me, it would be fine before one of us has to go if we could do the dance just one more time. And that Phil has names for all the alligators, and this one's name is Wartnose. And Wartnose died of natural causes in 2009. And he says here that he knew him as a grown male since 1969. Yeah, so it's a long time. So questions, comments? Anything you want to know, or anywhere this has gone?
How
Yeah.
many fingers does Dave Scott have?
David Scott has all his fingers. David Scott has made it somehow, and the reason that he's got all his fingers is because his specialty for 40 years, he was a herpetologist, studied reptiles and amphibians, was salamanders, and it's really hard for a salamander to take off a finger. So, yeah. He had a research site, a little Carolina Bay up in the Savannah River site, and he put a fence all the way around it. And for over 25 years, he caught and tagged every salamander that came in the spring, and then he took them back out. He took them back and forth over the fence. He had these buckets in the ground, and they'd all go in the buckets, and that's how he got his data for his study. I think at one time he had a Guinness Book of World Records. He had the longest running amphibian study in the world. Yeah, with this one site. That's the kind of crazy, wonderful stuff scientists do. Yeah. Good question, though, about what else? Yes?
So if you do encounter an alligator out in the wild, and it does seem to come to, what are the...
Run! Phil, what's the best thing to do if they encounter an alligator? Get away, right? I mean, basically. If you get a chance, yeah, you get a chance. Yeah, one of the things I was going to say that was in my notes that I didn't talk about is one of the things I've discovered about working with scientists in the field, whether it's alligators, crocodiles, coyotes, is almost all conflicts with wildlife are border conflicts. If you think about, I did a funny little Google search just to see how many people in the Southeast get killed in the wild by an alligator. Very few. The people who've been killed by alligators are usually on a walk at Hilton Head with their dog, or something like that. And it's a border conflict. The alligator has its territory or its place, and we have our place, and our places are now pushing in to all of the places that alligators and coyotes and snakes and everything lives. Yeah. So the border conflicts.
I got to go on a field trip to the Tomyaki Center, but
Yeah.
like where you're standing, there was a large mother alligator.
Mm-hmm.
But what was really interesting was there was like 3 baby alligators on her top of her body, and then there was I don't know how many little alligators. I didn't know they had that many little baby alligators.
Mm-hmm.
So how many do alligators have, babies?
Phil, what's the range of a number of alligators, eggs that hatch out in a year?
They have 45 eggs, or the mean
Yeah.
number of eggs.
45 eggs.
And sometimes none of them hatch, sometimes all of them.
Sometimes 45 eggs, and sometimes none of them hatch, and sometimes all of them hatch. So you never know. I bet Phil knew the name of that gator, probably, if it was on Yawkey, yeah.
They said, stay right where you are. Don't go any closer.
Yeah.
Just look down there. It was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah.
Go to Tomyaki Center. It's really an interesting place to go to.
It's a great tour, yeah. Yeah, really great tour.
Judy behind her house.
Yeah.
Has an alligator that birthed about 13, did you count?
Dirt.
Yeah.
Don't let David Scott know. He'll jump in there and get them all.
And so they live right, do
Yeah.
they stay? Will the 13
They've moved
go?
on from what I can tell.
They disperse, right, Phil? They disperse once they begin to get some age on them. Yeah, a year. Yeah. A little over a year, they'll
And then
disperse.
Find a new territory.
Yeah.
They don't always stay where they're born or come back or.
No, they move. Yeah.
And she has a little poodle.
Oh,
Yeah, somebody told her, do not let the poodle, go to the potty in the
Right,
backyard.
right.
Try not to have
Don't even let the alligators know I haven't.
dog. Is there any rule there?
no rule. No, I mean,
Okay.
it's,
Is there one of that?
yeah. Yeah, I asked Phil once, one of my favorite quotes from Phil, and it's in the book, is I said, Phil, how smart is an alligator? And Phil said, as smart as they need to be. So whether or not the alligator, I mean, obviously, I mean, any predator is going to notice that some small little bit of protein is more moving around. Yeah. So yeah, I would just be careful. Yeah. But once again, that whole idea of the border and the border wars is, the border wars are real right now in the Low Country because the population has expanded so much, and there are a good many. There's a good bit of wildlife in the Low Country. Bears, bears are moving down this way. Alligators, coyotes, yeah. Yeah, because of a lot of mange. Yeah.
So if an alligator has 45 babies.
45 eggs, and if all of them hatched out,
All of them hatch
yeah.
What's the predator for the baby?
Oh, what's the predator for a baby alligator? Anything will eat a baby alligator, right, Phil? Just about. Yeah, what's the predator for a baby alligator? Raccoons.
Okay.
And other alligators, herons, a wading bird, great blues. Not all herons, but great blues. Because, they're not that big. Yeah.
So what are the chances of the 45 making it?
There's probably, I can tell you, here's, I don't know what the percentage is with alligators. We'll ask Phil in a second, maybe he'll tell us. But with coyotes, one of the things that fascinated me is that if you take a population of coyotes, let's say there are, the chances of coyotes living more than a year is it's like less than 10%. For a coyote to get 4, 5, 6 years old is remarkable because almost all of them die within the first year. A lot of them starve to death. They starve, and then they're not very smart, so they get shot or they get hit by a car. But as they get older, they get smarter, and so an old coyote, though, might only be one of like a 1 in 10 chance they get to be that old, more than a year or two old. Phil, when you look at alligators, how like if you have 15 of those eggs hatch and you have 15 little alligators, what are the chances of how many of those alligators are going to make it to the first year? Probably.
Depends on the habitat.
Yeah.
Real big.
Yeah.
Some all make it,
Yeah.
and some don't make it at all.
Yeah.
It's real variable.
Yeah. Very variable. Yeah. Yeah.
The ones that are well protected by the female do well.
Yeah.
Some females are negligent.
Yeah.
They get eaten by them.
Yeah. One of the most fascinating pieces of research that's going on out there that Phil's been following and been a part of and has sent me a couple of articles about is they're discovering how many different animals use alligator nests in various ways or are found around alligator nests. I mean, what's the species count now? What's it up to? Over 100 different animals use those openings where alligator nests are in some way, shape, or form.
And some of them use it year round.
Some use it year round. Yeah.
Kind of like a cove.
Yeah, almost like that. Yeah.
Not when the alligator's there. When the alligator leaves the nest.
When the alligator's there, some of them even well, I mean, at that point, somewhat, not as much so, I would think. Yeah. Yeah. But that's some fascinating research. I love the research I was describing where they put the trackers on the alligators and they actually know where they go and they can track them by GPS. But this research with the alligator nest is fascinating too.
Where is the largest alligator population, so to speak, in South Carolina? Is it Yawkey?
All along the coast, the whole coast. Yeah, I mean, I was in my notes I had on Facebook. I saw that you saw one today. Yeah. Two, yeah, yeah. That's somebody down here put on Facebook, oh, I wish the state would control these alligators. They're out of control. But they're doing well in South Carolina, I think. They seem to be, yeah. Yeah.
Does the control shooting, or I've forgotten what it's
Hunting.
called, yeah, does that help keep the population from?
Phil, what do you think about the hunting?
Doesn't do much.
Doesn't do much.
One thing that Tom Murphy was concerned about is people target these big males,
Yeah,
Right.
and they're the real breeders.
Oh,
And when you take out a large number of the big males, you affect the rest of the population that's still there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because if you see a really, really, really big alligator, it's most likely they're the breeders, the
like
male.
at Santee, you see pictures of those
Yeah.
humongous
Yeah,
ones
yeah,
that are killed,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe there should be a law like with fish that you can't get the big ones, you know? You have to measure them or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
You know, yes.
Actually, the hunting is not to control population. It's to make money for the state.
Right,
Okay.
right,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Make,
Population,
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
yeah.
That makes
You want
sense.
to diminish the population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan.